So for today's subject matter expert, we have Jean Horton here with us. Jean is a licensed mental health counselor and a geriatric mental health specialist. She has a previous chemical dependency professional license, along with experience working with co-occurring disorders, including mental health, substance use, and mental health diagnoses. She's a U.S. Army veteran, and she currently works as a behavioral health quality improvement consultant for the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, where she's a subject matter expert on the CMS State Operations Manual for nursing homes. She's part of a team that provides resident-specific behavioral and regulatory consultation to nursing homes that includes person-centered interventions for residents with challenging behaviors. Her team is also known as a champion for resident rights. And I'm going to turn it over to Jean.
Perfect, thank you. And I just threw a note in the chat. Those of you guys out there in Washington may have heard of my team. I'm on the Residential Care Services Behavioral Health Support Team. Just that's a reference point for any of you guys. Anyway, getting into it, engaging with the residents with effective communication skills. So today that's what we're talking about, with the understanding that effective communication starts with active listening skills. So next slide, please. We'll get into that. Perfect. So think about all the things that you have to do each day at work, the situations you encounter, and your responsibilities every day. You've got care tasks to get done, goals achieved, plans written, and orders followed, and all that takes the majority of your focus throughout your shift. Now think about all your residents. Your facility just isn't their home. Your most well-adjusted, functioning resident could still be afraid, lonely, uncomfortable, and overwhelmed the minute you walk in the room, totally not ready to work with you, even though you're ready to get down to business. And the resident who has mental health or cognitive challenges may have even more difficulty. Unfortunately, most of us know what it feels like to be dismissed by others when we're trying to communicate. Most of us also know what it feels like when someone is really hearing what we have to say. So as we move along here, please take a minute to ask yourself, how do you know when someone is actively listening to you? So often, we're only halfway listening to people because we're so busy coming up with our response at the same time. That leaves our attention divided and increases the odds of the other person feeling dismissed. But the goal of active listening is to understand the other person, what they mean, how they feel, and where they're coming from. Active listening can help you connect with residents respectfully, providing them with the space to be heard and understood. That leads to increased comfort and trust in problem solving, and all of that helps you get along with your task. Put another way, active listening can help you develop positive rapport with your residents. And science has shown us many times how positive rapport contributes to improved care quality and outcomes in all aspects of healthcare, from the therapist couch to the PCP office to your nursing home wing. And the good news is that anybody can learn these active listening skills. So while active listening skills are about listening and helping the resident feel heard, our verbal communication actually plays a big role in how we do that. And a key component of active listening is open-ended questions. Open-ended questions invite a longer, more detailed response versus just a yes or a no. They're also a way to create space for the resident to fully express what they have to say. Some examples of open-ended questions include, what's on your mind? What's bothering you about this? What concerns do you have about what we're about to do? How are you feeling after your PT session? How can I help you feel more comfortable? Can you tell me more about how you're doing? What's coming up in your mind right now as we talk about this? All of these questions, these open-ended questions, encourage your resident to really talk, which then provides us with more information. Going forward, that helps us understand one another and develops that rapport along the way. Active listening also involves reflecting statements, where we literally reflect back what the resident has said. Done well, these reflective statements help the resident see that we're really paying attention to what they have to say, and this too contributes to that positive rapport. Reflection should occur throughout your conversations with your residents. Reflecting statements can include paraphrasing what the resident has said in a brief way, or summarizing what the resident said in a longer way to ensure understanding of multiple key pieces of information. So let's consider an example of a resident who had a nasty fall at home and had to have knee surgery. They've also been diagnosed with severe depression and at times have difficulty orienting to the present time. They're about to start rehabilitation and are feeling so overwhelmed that they don't even want to start. Compounding the issue is the fact that they live alone and there's a lot of work to be done in the house before they can return. And because they lack supports, organizing all of this falls on them as well. So a paraphrasing, reflecting statement should be short. And in this situation, it might sound like, "You've got a lot ahead of you since the knee surgery, and it's hard to even know where to start." Nice and brief. A summarizing, paraphrasing statement should be longer and include key bits of information. In this situation, it might sound like, "You've got so many steps before you go home. You've got to get better at walking again, but that's going to take a bunch of sessions that are super painful. Then there's all this stuff that needs to be done at the house, like getting the ramp and getting the bathroom set up. There's contractors to organize and bids to look at, and everything has to be timed the right way as well. So between the stuff you have to do here and the stuff you have to do at home, it's hard to know even where to start." Active listening is also about reflecting feelings. This lets the resident know that you're not just hearing their words, you're also picking up on their emotions, sometimes even the words being left unsaid. It's about letting them know that you really see them and can appreciate how they're feeling. Empathy is just a 10-cent word that means being able to recognize and appreciate the feelings of another person. Validation is another 10-cent word that means being able to understand the feelings of another person and find those feelings appropriate to the situation. If your resident hasn't actually expressed a feeling, but you can tell that they're feeling something, you can use empathy and validation to make an educated guess on how they might be feeling. After all, if you were going through this, how would you feel? An example of reflecting feelings with our knee surgery rehabilitation resident using empathy and validation might sound something like this. "All of this sounds scary and overwhelming. PT can be really painful, especially at first, and there's nothing quite as depressing as pain. You were alone when you fell, and once you go home, you'll be alone again. The fall was scary, and I bet the idea of going back to where it all happened is scary too. Feeling the way you do makes total sense. This is really tough stuff, and so much pressure on you to get it all done. Just playing phone tag with all these contractors has to be frustrating. It feels like every day in here is Monday, and it all runs together, but it's on you to keep all this stuff organized. You got so much to get right, and honestly, I'd be feeling a little panicked myself." If you notice in those examples that I gave, I used a lot of feeling words, and reflecting feelings is an important part of reflecting feelings is to name the feeling as part of our statement. Active listening can also include thoughtful silence. That can be tricky. Silence feels awkward because we tend to want to fill the empty hanging space with words, especially if we're in a hurry. And in nursing homes, we're always in a hurry. But 5 to 10 seconds of silence can really help that resident gather their thoughts and process before anything else is said. Remember, even your most functioning resident could have a hard time processing all that's going on. And if you've got a resident with mental health or cognitive challenges, they're probably going to have an even more difficult time. Sometimes it's these little periods of silence that make the difference between a resident feeling safe and continuing to talk to us versus shutting down because they feel rushed. Remember, it's all about that positive rapport. Therapist pro tip: it can be helpful to remember that while thoughtful silence can feel uncomfortable for us, that's not usually how it feels to the other person. You don't even usually notice. So now that we've talked about ways to use our voice in effective communication, let's look at other ways to communicate with our residents. Body language plays a huge role in our nonverbal communication and helping residents feel like we're really hearing them out. Without crowding them, lean in, nod, make eye contact, and use your facial expression to show that you're paying attention. Pay attention to the pace of conversation too. Someone speaking quickly, slowly, loudly, or quietly is also conveying something to you, especially if it's not their baseline communication style. If they're speaking slowly, match your conversation speed to theirs. It will help them feel safe and give them the time they need to process. Although, if they're speaking quickly or are highly anxious, don't feel like you have to rush. Those feelings can be contagious, but by slowing down the pace of your communication and presenting a calm demeanor, this may encourage your resident to also slow down. And that's a good thing. Paying attention to their nonverbal communication can also help you with your nonverbal communication. For example, if your resident seems to be feeling anxious or sad, having an anxious or sad facial expression yourself can help them feel supported and understood without you even having to say anything. A relaxed, natural posture can encourage your resident and help them feel safe. But also know that a rigid body posture or having your arms crossed can actually discourage conversation. In fact, it could even cause someone with mental health or cognitive challenges to feel threatened, and that's not going to support rapport. Your resident will also be communicating nonverbally, and paying attention to this can help you come up with those open ended questions and reflections we just talked about. A resident who is talking matter of factly but keeps fiddling with their blankets may be feeling anxious. A resident with tears in their eyes is saying something, even if they're telling you with their words that nothing is wrong. When it's appropriate, human touch can convey what words cannot. Even if it's just briefly placing your hand on theirs, it can really help build trust and help people feel heard. I'm sure many of us on this call felt an urge to reach out to our poor resident who got their knee busted up and had to go through rehab. It's just kind of a natural thing sometimes. We want to just reach out with our instincts and put a hand on someone to create connection. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Not as a professional therapist and not as somebody who has to educate providers on all these F tags. So, up next are some details to think about in addition to your active listening and nonverbal communication skills. Culture could play a tremendous role in communication. What's considered appropriate body language, eye contact, and tone can vary widely across cultures. And that doesn't just mean residents from different countries. Growing up in the United States with parents who emigrated here, having English as a second language, or even just the regional differences of living in Seattle versus rural Alaska. Although in my mind, I feel like most of Alaska, or even your big city areas, are probably somewhat rural. It's pretty isolated up there. You know, there's going to be different cultures in these different places, and we're all in the same country. There may also be differences in how female residents engage with male staff versus how male residents engage with female staff. So your powers of observation are going to be really critical when it comes to effectively communicating with a resident who doesn't share the same culture as you. We also need to take the resident's communication ability into account. Comprehension ability into account. Too much medical speak or acronyms can be confusing to anyone, even alarming. That can also damage that positive rapport we keep talking about because, after all, we all know some residents, they're going to ask you questions and not let you out of the room until they're satisfied. But there are others who are going to be too embarrassed or too confused to do anything but smile and nod. We don't want that. We want them to understand what we're telling them. So don't talk to them like they're children, but do break that information down in just simple language that anyone can understand. Always face your resident and enunciate your words clearly, regardless of whether or not they have hearing challenges. I think we all learned during the pandemic just how much lip reading we do. And when we were wearing masks, we had to figure out how to talk to each other without being able to see all of each other's faces anymore. Now, obviously, we're still in a difficult time. COVID's not over, it's flu season. So if you're in a situation where wearing a mask is required, but it's interfering with your communication, talk with your infection control person to see what other options you can figure out. You can say all the right things, but still damage rapport if you don't think about how your body is positioned compared to how the resident is positioned, particularly if they have mental health or cognitive challenges. Standing over someone lying in a bed or sitting in a wheelchair could be overwhelming or intimidating, compared to crouching down or just pulling over a stool to put you and them on a more even level. If your resident is mobile in any way, be careful not to block exits. Even something small like that can help a resident feel safe and more in control, not trapped. And sometimes you just straight up got to get creative. And in nursing homes, I know that we all do this every single day. Um, if you're talking to somebody with, sensory, cognitive, or other challenges, sometimes just sitting down face to face and talking to one another isn't going to quite get it done. If drawing a picture, using a picture board, or writing down a word works, it might feel silly, but whatever. It works. It gets the message across. There's also a number of interpreter resources out there for people who don't speak English well. And by speaking English well, I mean more than hello, good morning, how are you? Does this person have enough English to really understand discharge instructions? Talk about why they're refusing care. There's a lot of level of ability to communicate in a language, and not everyone has that advanced ability. So if your resident is able to use these tools, encourage them to use them as well. Not sure what to say next? Take a deep breath and gather your thoughts. Just like thoughtful silence, it feels awkward and like it takes a long time, but therapist here, I'm telling you, it really does not take that long and it's not that weird. The chances are good that your resident isn't even going to notice. Although, if they do, I think it's okay to be perfectly honest about you taking a pause. You could say something like, I hear you. You've just given me a lot of information and I'm gathering my thoughts so I can figure out how to best respond. Just be transparent about what's going on. I'm not ignoring you. I'm taking a minute to kind of let all that filter through my brain so I can figure out the next best way to go here. People often worry about getting it wrong when it comes to reflecting feelings. But again, therapists here, try not to do that. Most people are forgiving and they'll correct you. But if it does happen, acknowledge it. You could say something like, hey, thanks for helping me understand because it's really important that I get this right. You're not sad. You're really pissed off. I got it. Understood. And the conversation usually can flow pretty naturally from there. Remember that it took time for you to develop the skills needed to work at a big place like a nursing home, but you did it. These effective communication skills can be developed too. Expressing gratitude to the resident for sharing their thoughts and feelings can go a long way towards that rapport as well. This can help them feel safe and encourage connection. And that might sound something like, I know this isn't easy to talk about, and I appreciate you trusting me with this stuff. Just call it out. We are having a difficult conversation here, and I just appreciate you putting it all out there for me. Just like I said before, anxiety and agitation can be so contagious. So you want to watch for it so that you don't let it infect you. And then a few minutes ago, you were asked to ask yourself how you know what it's like when someone is actively listening to you. And you may have found that some of that was really difficult to put into words or instructions. You just sometimes know what it looks like and what it feels like. We all got into this work because we have compassion for others and want to help. So you probably know more about everything we've talked about today than you think. Sometimes you've got to just go with your gut when it comes to communicating that compassion and desire to help your resident. That's okay too. Just like I'm a big proponent of touch, I'm a big proponent of just what does my gut say is the best way to go here? How do I trust myself to get this right and get my the message of care across to this person?